Hi, welcome. I am so glad you're joining us today for National Seafood Month. We have a very special guest with us, Jen Dianto Kemmerly. And Jen is our Vice President of Global Ocean Conservation. She leads both our Seafood Watch and our Global Ocean Conservation teams, who have really transformed how the world thinks about sustainable seafood. And Jen and her teams are advancing policies and practices in local restaurants, and informing partnerships in the Philippines to Tunisia and beyond. So today we're going to talk about Jen's career and leadership journey and how the aquarium is driving global change. If you want to learn more about both Seafood Watch and our Global Ocean Conservation Program, check out our LinkedIn article where we put all the details about those programs there. And we invite you to ask questions during our live interview today. So if you want to put some questions in the chat for us, we'll see if we can answer those. But we will dive in. So Jen, I'm so excited that you're here today with us.
Me too. Wow, you kicked it off with a pun. We're going to dive in.
Oh!
We promise this will happen over and over.
I've spent too long on the marketing team, and now it just puns. They come to me.
Oh no, this poor audience. Just
Yeah, so Jen, you've been at the aquarium for more than 2 decades.
Yeah.
And you've helped shape this global seafood sustainability movement. Both your teams are so interesting. The programs that they work on connect science, they connect policy, they work on the ground with communities, really complex, issues, all 3 of those. So just wondering, for you and you coming into your career, what inspired you to want to take on this type of work?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great place to start because it's a lot of moving pieces. But that's life, right? Nothing is linear in life. And with the program, when we started talking about what does sustainable fisheries and aquaculture look like? How do you even define it? Really at the outset, we knew we had to work with a lot of different stakeholder groups. We knew consumers had to be aware that there were even issues. So that's public marketing and communications. We knew that businesses needed to make commitments to sustainability. So I wish I'd paid more attention in the economics class when I was in college. We knew that we had to work closely with industry. And Monterey Bay Aquarium had already set out that multi-stakeholder approach. So at the time, I was working in New England with the fishing industry and with New England Aquarium. And I just really appreciated when the position was advertised for the first Seafood Watch director, how right at the outset, Monterey Bay Aquarium knew that you had to work with all of these moving pieces. And that really attracted me to the project. The other piece I'll add is that Monterey Bay Aquarium and the broader sustainable seafood movement always knew this was a long game. From day one, this is not an issue that was going to be resolved within a year or 2 or 10, that it was going to take a number of decades, and we can get into that a little bit later on in the conversation. But that also attracted me to it. It was a complex challenge, and I was ready for it. The aquarium demonstrated that it wanted to be a leader in this space, so it was a bit of a good match for me.
Yeah, that's great. And that's so true about the long game, because even after doing all that work, they're still monitoring, they're still keeping those relations up.
Yeah.
Those players change and educate new folks coming in. So the work continues, which is great. And the aquarium's work is shaping sustainable seafood policy from the Philippines to Tunisia and beyond in our Global Ocean Conservation Program. And I don't know that a lot of people know how much the aquarium really does globally. But you do. And so I'm hoping maybe you could share a story with us of one of those projects that really captures what maybe success looks like on the ground, or give us a little taste of what those projects look like and how we're shaping, policy abroad too.
A taste about our seafood.
Oh my
Fun
gosh.
number 2.
I am on
Everyone,
a roll.
I hope you're keeping tabs. Sorry. I want to give a little bit of a story as to how we even got to the place where we went global, and then I'd love to talk a little bit about the Philippines and Tunisia. When Monterey Bay Aquarium launched an exhibit 2 decades ago, we really wanted to feature the fisheries and fish farming or aquaculture operations that were following and adhering best practices and that were well managed. And we featured them in a Seafood Watch Pocket Guide and really started to build awareness with consumers and businesses. At the same time, we were doing research to understand what were the challenges that fisheries and aquaculture were facing worldwide. So for 20 years, we have been evaluating the environmental impacts of fisheries and aquaculture that are coming into the United States. Because we're a top importer, that was essentially looking at fisheries and aquaculture around the world.
Right.
For 20 years, there have been some seafood commodity groups like farm salmon or farm shrimp or blue swimming crab that have been red rated. And for us, what that means that there is some significant environmental impacts, and management, resource managers and policymakers and industry have not been able to crack the nut on how to make environmental improvements or protect stock or the ecosystem, what have you. So when you think about blue swimming crab, the listeners might be like, I don't eat blue swimming crab. Well, if you eat crab cakes when you go out to a restaurant for an appetizer, yes, you do. Lump crab meat and crab salads and whatnot. It's a very, very popular menu item in the United States. So when we're really trying to understand, well, where is the blue swimming crab coming from? Do we have some market leverage here that we could help incentivize improvements?
Right.
If we work with the business community in the U.S. to say, hey, supplier, if you make these improvements, we will preferentially source from you. And blue swimming crab from the Philippines was one of those places where there were some challenges with both the fishing gear that was used to catch the blue swimming crab and with management of that resource. So we decided to do what we think Monterey Bay Aquarium does really, really well, which is convene, bring people together. So we brought our science to bear. We showed the government and the industry, all the different stakeholders on the ground, what were some of the challenges that we were seeing in our science-based assessments. And then we got those parties together, including local NGOs, some of which were working on these issues for a long time. So it really was convening the right parties and helping them co-design some solutions.
Right.
We started working with academia to do stock assessments to better understand the health of that fishery. And I would say probably 2 to 3 years into the project, again, these are long-term projects, we started to understand some of the management challenges. When we look at the blue swimming crab fishery in the Philippines, these are a number of islands in the Visayan Sea in the Philippines, each with individual communities on each of these islands, each of them fishing. And there wasn't a large coordinated effort of collecting data or training and capacity building, reporting and monitoring like you discussed earlier. So we took a big step back and we decided we need to work with the industry and the government on building that capacity. And today, about 5 years later into the project, we are now working with the government who's developing what they call local governance units. They are building that capacity in each one of these villages so they can collect their own data and they can adhere to practices that will help sustain the blue swimming crab stock. I know it's a mouthful. I know it's a big story, but if you think about all the parties that I mentioned, it was certainly the fishers on the ground. It was the broader community that had to have a voice. It was the government to come in and help build capacity. And it was the market to say, we want to see this improvement.
Right.
How can we support you? Our role really was paving the way.
Yeah, I love that. And it shows too, like, I think, like, we're not afraid of that complexity. And I think that's really wonderful. And kind of showing in these areas that that we care, that like the American public does want sustainable seafood and to support communities that are fishing and farming the food that we eat. So that's so interesting and awesome. The Seafood Watch program helped spark massive change in how people think about seafood. Was there a moment for the program where you thought, you know, wow, like we can really make a difference in this space? So like a moment that you just felt really good about kind of the direction of the program and the, you know, role you were stepping into.
Yes. So when we started in this space, we started saying, oh, sustainable seafood. And everyone's like, what the heck does that mean? How do you define that? And there were entire conversations and news articles debating what sustainable meant. Sustainable means it can sustain itself into the long term. The fish will be available into the long term. The other animals in the ecosystem can exist into the long term. Humans can rely on that as a source of protein into the long term. Sustain, right? So at the early time of the program's launch, when we started doing public awareness and talking about why sustainable seafood's important, we were told it's a fad. It's a trend.
Interesting.
Organic, it's, that was a trend. I don't know, insert any other trend that was happening in the early 2000s. Like, this is not even going to be a thing in 5-10 years. So what really jumped out at me is when I went to what is now called the North American Seafood Expo in Boston. We used to call it the Boston Seafood Show. And that's the annual gathering in North America of the seafood industry. And at the time, in the early 2000s, that industry was the one saying, this is a trend, this is a blip, It was when I walked into one, I can't remember the year, but all the booths in the trade show started having the words, sustainable options, responsible choice. It started talking about what they were doing to protect the resource that they were fishing or farming, and or the surrounding ocean ecosystem. And I'm like, this is not going to be a trend. Yeah. This is here. And it was that moment when I saw the trade press and the industry say that this was no longer a fad, that there was a recognition, just like any business, you want to protect your inventory. That recognition took hold. And that's really what's underneath this. It's like we need to protect resources into the long term because they have a right to be protected and not impacted by us people, but also because billions of people rely on seafood for nutrition, nourishment, and millions rely on it for their livelihoods. So it's worth protecting.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you hit on like both the intrinsic value and the economic value. Both things, holding both in that space. So leadership question for you. Leadership often means seeing the potential before others do. What did you see early on that convinced you the aquarium could influence the global seafood sector? So you just shared a story maybe more domestically, but if there's a story from that global space.
Yeah, I mean, we are really in a unique place here at Monterey Bay Aquarium because we have an entire bricks and mortar aquarium. And we have experience with understanding people, what moves people, what inspires people. Our mission is to inspire conservation of the ocean. And I think that allows us to kind of come into it, what you just said a moment ago, holding both spaces. Like, this is worth protecting, and we could play a role. How can we leverage the trust that we have from the public? How could we leverage the relationships that we've built with policymakers? We've always been a science-based organization. How could we leverage that expertise in fisheries and aquaculture? So what I saw early on were the ingredients. I won't do a seafood pun, but I so wanted to. Were the ingredients for a really comprehensive program to really lean into the strengths of the aquarium. And something else that zoos and aquariums do really well is collaboration and partnership. There's hundreds of zoos and aquariums across the globe, and very early on, we leveraged that. So we have over 230 zoo, aquarium, and museum partners in the United States alone that we call our conservation partners, that in their own backyard and with their respective audiences are talking about why sustainable fisheries and aquaculture are important, why our appetite for seafood makes a difference, how our business commitments can play a role. And they're helping us amplify this so that when industries and governments who are supplying our market hear this concern, hear these voices, see the scientific evaluations that we've done, we've set the table to sit down and have that discussion and figure out, is there a way that we could help further? It was just really that mix that brought it all together for me and made me think, as an aquarium, we have a unique role here.
Yeah, that's so true. Even just coming to the aquarium, like it's interesting the difference that we make as a public learning institution is so unique. And then having these arms of being able to partner with different zoos and aquariums, it's just incredible. That reach is unheard of.
Reach, like an octopus?
Yes, like an octopus.
Number 3.
You said ingredients. That was kind of seafoody.
I'm sorry, I'm not being
And then
fair.
you said set the table. That was kind of seafoody.
Gosh, that's 5.
You've said before that protecting oceans and protecting people go hand in hand. Can you describe that a little bit more? What does that mean to you personally, or what do you mean when you say that?
Yeah, I mean, they do. I know we've talked a lot about the intrinsic value of that. These creatures that we fish or farm to eat require protection in their own right, as do the ecosystems that are impacted by fishing and farming activities. But everything is so interconnected, and we have to know this. And if you're listening to this program, you probably have a propensity to understand already the value of how interconnected things are in this world, and especially when dealing with environmental issues. But in 2015, a few things happened that really woke us up, so that it wasn't just looking at fisheries or aquaculture from a purely environmental impact perspective, but more holistically. What's going on with respect to social responsibility, climate change, other issues. So let me tell you a little bit about where that came from. The first thing happened in 2015 was an expose. The Associated Press, the Boston Globe released articles that opened the world's eyes to the fact that there was modern day slavery and human rights abuses in the seafood supply chain. And that rocked our movement, and it rocked the world, because there were retailers that were named, supply chains that were named. And it's like, no, this isn't just hearsay. There is evidence that this is happening. There are people who are being abused to get seafood to your table. What do we do with that? So the environmental sustainable seafood movement very quickly mobilized and brought together labor experts. And today we have a number of tools at our disposal to understand what is the risk in supply chains of contributing unknowingly to these horrible issues, and what can businesses do about it? What can governments do about it? So we can get into that in a little bit here, but just to let you know that it really was an eye-opening thing and something we should have seen, because let's talk about what's in front of me. And I don't know if the viewers can see it. Because also in 2015, you want to hold up the other
Sure.
Yay. So this is a rainbow of Sustainable Development Goals. So there's 17 of these, and we can put it back down. I'll talk to them as we go through. But the United Nations in 2015 was like, we still have throughout the world poverty and hunger. It's 2015. What is happening? And we have a growing global population. So they set a goal that by 2030, I know it was lofty, but by 2030, let's eradicate poverty and hunger. How are we going to do that? So the countries that are party to the United Nations, including the United States, came up with 17 sustainable development goals, that if we're going to continue as a global society, what are the things that we are going to strive toward and make progress on together? One of those goals, Sustainable Development Goal 14, was specific and is specific to life underwater. And specifically what that goal wants to achieve is sustainable use of marine resources, which speaks directly to our work. But we also see number 1, ending poverty. We also see number 3, health and well-being. We also see number 12, responsible consumption. We also see number 17, which is about partnerships, climate action, pathways to get the world to work together on not just one issue, all the issues together. So every few years, the United Nations pulls together to try to take a stock take on where we are in meeting these goals. But every year, at least one of these is a conference in and of itself to help keep us accountable. But the whole point of this is, whether it's gender equality, education, eradicating hunger, taking care of our environment, it all has to work together. It's like pulling a thread. If you mess up one, you're messing up the other. If people are starving, if people don't have secure livelihoods, if they don't have basic nourishment, they're not going to stop and do a community cleanup or try to eradicate plastic pollution in their backyard. They're going to try to get water to their family in whatever way possible, even if that means using plastic bottles. So we needed to change the way we look at sustainability. So what Monterey Bay Aquarium and the entire sustainable seafood movement does now is when we talk about sustainable seafood or sustainable fisheries and aquaculture production, we are not just talking about the environmental impact. Sustainable seafood is seafood that's caught in an environmentally responsible way, but it's also socially responsible. It's utilizing fair labor practices, and there's a healthy socioeconomic system and strong governance to stand up those fisheries and aquaculture so they can sustain themselves and the communities and people that rely on them into the future.
That's so fascinating. It's a lot, and it's so interesting, and it's so true. Like pulling one thread, it really pulls, everything else, and it's so fascinating. And I think it's so important and so wonderful that we really think about putting people first and communities first who are fishing or farming for seafood. And I think we were talking about the stats, like 600 billion people rely on seafood as a primary source of protein, and 30 billion as a livelihood, for their livelihood, either working in the industry or.
So let me share a little bit more on that.
Yeah.
We've got a population of about 9 billion and growing in the United States. Right now, 3 billion people rely on seafood.
3 billion.
Not because they're going to the local, ShopRite or Piggly Wiggly or Safeway or enter your regional retailer into that sentence. It's because that is where they get their protein, their essential nutrition. The vitamins and minerals that their children need to grow, to develop healthy brains and healthy bodies, to be contributors to society. 3 billion people. And that is only going to increase. So when we think about what role can we play, if our U.S. consumption patterns are putting pressure on a delicate resource or environment that's helping feed those 3 billion people, we should pay attention. And we want to do what we can to try to protect those resources for not just so we can have seafood in 5 to 10 years or have our all-we-can-eat shrimp buffet. It's so that 3 billion people and counting can have access to food and food security. And the 600 million people who rely on the seafood sector for their livelihoods. And when we talk about those livelihoods, a lot of that are the people who are individually fishing or farming the seafood. But there's also a lot of that number are people who are working in the processing facilities, mending the nets. A lot of times those are women.
Right.
And they don't have a voice in the management decisions for that particular resource and how it's managed. So one of these sustainable development goals does focus on gender equity, and that is a growing movement in the sustainable seafood space, but really in the environmental space at large, like gender voice, gender equity, diversity in voices. Just because you're working kind of upstream or downstream, I know there's a pun in there, from the actual catching or harvesting of the fish or the shellfish or the kelp, all seafood, doesn't mean you shouldn't have a say in the way that resource is managed, because that still is your livelihood.
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah, I want to explore that more. Mentorship is a theme we hear a lot at the aquarium. Who have been your biggest mentors, and how do you pay that forward in your own team or in your own work?
Yeah, thank you. This is a great question. It's Julie Packard. Which
she is.
Yeah. I grew up in the 80s in Staten Island, New York, to an Italian Catholic household. And I'm going to get personal for a minute, but I really was not encouraged to be a scientist or to leave New York. But alas, we retired in Florida. My family did. And I went to university, and I was encouraged to be a teacher so I could be home at 3 o'clock.
Interesting.
For my kids, which I did not have. or did I have a husband? But it was just growing up in this atmosphere that there was a real expectation around a gender role in the place where I grew up. And, I just wasn't feeling it. I was always drawn to the ocean. And I was a middle school science teacher. And then I was like, oh, I just got to follow my heart. And I went back to school and got my degree in environmental sciences and was really through diving, and just the ocean just kept pulling me. I did grow up on an island, Staten Island, beautiful beaches, little secret. So I was always drawn to the ocean. So when I did get into my professional career, I started looking for positions in that space, right? So American Oceans Campaign was one of my first positions with an NGO in DC. It's now called Oceana. Soon I went up to New England. I worked with the fishing industry up there. I worked at New England Aquarium. Then this job opened up at Monterey Bay Aquarium. The whole time, all of that journey, especially in the aquarium space and even in the New England fishing space, there were a lot of very powerful women behind all of these robust conversations. And sometimes they were extremely robust, but there was a women's voice there. And when I got to Monterey Bay Aquarium, Julie was like, we want to build out this program. There's something there. And from the minute I got here, I never felt gender discrimination. I never felt because you're a woman. I never felt because you're from here or of this class or what have you. It just never was a thing. And it was the most remarkable stress relief because I just couldn't believe that it was such a clear path. And I really attribute that to the female leadership here at Monterey Bay Aquarium, but specifically Julie Packard. And I also wonder, I haven't truthed this out with her, but because of the Silicon Valley tech background of this region, of the Packard family, is there some sort of default to risk-taking? Authenticity and trying new things because it might bring a better world. Silicon Valley is trying to do that still. Monterey Bay Aquarium was founded by the Packard family. I think Julie brought that ethos. So to me, she's my mentor for those reasons, for making me always feel like I could try new things, take risks, and not feel because you are X, Y, Z, you don't have a clear path. The path was laid out.
Nice. Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah. She's so great. Such a mentor to all of us. Wondering, kind of back to our conversation about human connection and communities working in seafood. It's seafood is a globally traded food on the planet, most globally traded food on the planet. And sustainability and human rights, like you said, are deeply connected. Can you talk a little bit more about kind of the aquarium addressing both the environmental and social sides of seafood production? I know we've talked about that, but
I'll get it.
Yeah,
it's such a fundamental question. Look at the story I just told. It was a human story.
Yeah.
When I started my career in fisheries and aquaculture, it really was the human side that drew me in.
Right.
Of course, I wanted to protect the animals. That was like the mindset going in. I want to protect the ocean and protect the animals. And what are we doing? It's tragedy of the commons. Who's going to protect this resource? But the second you sit down with the industry and even the decision makers, everyone has a human story. Everyone does. So to ignore the humanity of what we're trying to do would be foolish. It is challenging because when people use the term stakeholders, that means all the people, all the groups that have a stake or an interest or dependency on that resource or care. And those groups could be someone has a cultural value on that resource. Somebody wants to protect biodiversity because biodiversity plays an essential role in healthy ecosystems and ocean vitality and resilience. But then there's the reality of there's an industry. People are trying to make money. people's jobs. There's governments. They were voted into office to protect that resource and adhere to these laws. I mean, you've got to look at this entire landscape, even to make progress on the environmental component, let alone if that environment shatters, falters, collapses, like what happened here in Monterey in the 40s and 50s, right? With our sardine fisheries and whatnot. What happened to Monterey? What happened to Cannery Row? Economic collapse. People lost jobs. And Cannery Row is a ghost town for decades and now has been brought back. And the fishery has been rebuilt. But that was by working together with people, bringing all those people and stakeholders together to co-design solutions.
Yeah, that's so true. And I don't know that a lot of people know the story of like where the aquarium sits is really a restoration story. The life, the death and life of Monterey Bay, and coming back is we sit on a fishery that did collapse and come back.
Danielle, can I just hit on that real quick?
Yes,
I don't think the audience knows this.
I recently learned this. I just started with the aquarium, but it's been fascinating for me to dive into that story. So please tell us.
Dove in again. Okay, pun number 6. So a lot of people ask us, why is an aquarium, which exhibits or teaches us or inspires us to protect the oceans and exhibits fish, why do you talk about seafood? The building of Monterey Bay Aquarium is literally in an old cannery. It used to be a cannery that canned sardines and other species that were caught literally feet from the building, right? It was a very thriving, read John Steinbeck's Cannery Row. And that fishery collapsed because of overfishing and because of oceanographic changes. It was just, so many things happened at once. The fishery collapsed. And all of Cannery Row collapsed with it, all of the canneries and livelihoods that depended on it. So it is a part of the aquarium's history to talk about what happens when you don't protect a resource and look ahead at what's coming. We have the capacity to look at oceanographic variables, climatic changes, pollution on our water that could impact seafood production. We have that ability. We now know that if you protect the ocean and keep it healthy, it makes it even more resilient. Looking at the creatures in our backyard, we know that brings value and happiness. Look at the smile on your face right now, and look at the smile on the faces of all of our visitors who leave.
Yeah.
Of course, we're going to talk about sustainable fisheries and aquaculture. It's in our backyard, and we're really committed to that.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. Such a wonderful movement to be a part of and a place to be a part of. Last question. For young conservation professionals, especially women, like we talked about, maybe entering the field into this career like you did, what advice do you have about finding their voice and having influence in a complex, maybe global space like seafood sustainability?
Oh, thank you. This is a great question to rest with as we, transition out of today's discussion. Really go with your gut. Really, really, really do. I knew when I was thinking about changing careers from teaching to the next phase, which was in this conservation space, something wasn't filling me up. Like something just wasn't right about that career. I was being pulled to something, and it was a leap, but I took it. And I prepared, though. I made sure I had somewhere to land. I made sure I, picked where I was going to go to get my degree. So I'm not just saying, just take the leap and go for it. Of course, do the homework. But if something doesn't feel right, it's probably not. And just to kind of follow that gut instinct is one bit of advice. But when you are looking where to land, also do that homework and make sure it's the right fit. I was very fortunate to find a place like Monterey Bay Aquarium, which I think is the best aquarium in the world. I also think it's one of the best research institutions in the world. And there's just amazing people. And that's why I've been here for over 20 years. I don't think a lot of people can say that about their careers. So take the leap, but please do so with eyes open. That's what I would say.
Lovely. Great advice for all of us. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Happy National Seafood Month. Please explore our website and some of the materials we have on LinkedIn about Seafood Watch and the Global Ocean Conservation Program. And we hope to see you at the aquarium very soon.
Bye.
Bye.